Tonight's game between the Heat and the Spurs has been postponed by the NBA. We'll talk about how we got here and what comes next on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We've got a quick reaction video on the heels of the news that tonight's game between the Heat and the Spurs is postponed by the NBA because the Heat just don't have the league-required 8 available players needed to play the game. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you may be listening or watching, whether it is on YouTube or you're on your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day and subscribing so that you can get reaction videos and podcasts just like this one. So, David, the big question is, how did we get here? Well, first, the Heat have been dealing with a bunch of their own injuries. Markieff Morris has been out since November 9th with whiplash. Bam Adebayo out the last few weeks and will be out for a few more weeks as he recovers from surgery to repair a ligament in his right thumb. Victor Oladipo, of course, hasn't played all season as he rehabs from offseason surgery on his right knee. And then Dwayne Dedmon and PJ Tucker were sidelined this week with their own more minor injuries, but injuries that have kept them out for several games. And then there was
Right.
Kyle Lowry, Udonis Haslem, and Max Strus, who all got placed into the league's health and safety protocols before Tuesday night's home game against the Wizards. In Strus's case, he got pulled right after he went through his warm-ups an hour before tip-off. So that was sort of the first wrench, the first unforeseen thing, because the Lowry and Haslem thing is, though it wasn't foreseen that they would enter protocols, it was less chaotic than what we're dealing with right now. Suddenly, the Heat were left with just 9 players against that Wizards team, including Zylan Cheatham, who the team signed from the G League last Tuesday when Caleb Martin was in protocols. Of course, Caleb Martin had gotten out of protocols and was available for that Wizards game, and then ended up starting in place of Max Strus. Then during the win against the Wizards, KZ Okpala sprains his right wrist. Jimmy Butler sprains his right ankle with a minute left in the game. Boom, Heat down to just 7 players, but they were hopeful to get Jimmy Butler or KZ Okpala back by Wednesday night's game in San Antonio, and that PJ Tucker, they were hopeful that he could come back from his leg injury. But then
not
after,
so fast.
Go ahead. Yeah,
no,
right.
not so fast. Yeah, not so fast. Yeah,
Not
exactly.
so fast. After playing the Wizards, a team facing its own outbreak, by the way, the Heat went through the league's mandatory COVID testing on Tuesday night before they got set to leave for a 15-day trip that was supposed to start tonight in San Antonio. They got the results back this morning, which put Zylan Cheatham, Gabe Vincent, and PJ Tucker into protocols. So Miami's injury report right now has 12 names on it. 6 with injuries, 6 in protocols. They do plan to sign guard Kyle Guy and forward Eric Holman from the G League, both of whom were set to be with the team in San Antonio by tonight's game, which was supposed to start at 8:30 Eastern time. But even with Holman and Guy, the Heat were down to just 7 players. They had a hard time signing an 8th player under the league's COVID exception in time for tonight's game because they had a hard time having that player also clear protocols and being able to meet the team in San Antonio. So eventually it was determined that the game should just be postponed to a date to be determined later. That's exactly what the NBA did. So, David, what comes next?
who the hell knows? I mean, we're talking about this, and think about the window which you're describing here. Aside from the long-term injuries of Bam this roster seems like it's going through incredible turmoil because of COVID, because of health and safety protocols over the last 48 hours. So it's so hard to predict. But realistically, let's say the next step is for Miami to be able to potentially travel to Houston either Thursday or Friday morning. I guess probably Thursday in advance of the game on Friday evening. If that's the case, who knows who they'll have on their roster who is available for them. I think Jimmy Butler may be able to return from his ankle injury. Maybe KZ Okpala returns as well. And that would give Miami enough players to at least face the Rockets, assuming that somebody else on this roster doesn't test positive over the next day or two,
Right.
which seems very likely right now. So it's so chaotic. Like, I mean, I'm listening to you go through this and my head is spinning and I don't know exactly how to keep track of it all. And that's our job, to keep track of all these things. And yet it just seems so daunting for Miami to be able to play with any kind of sense of regularity here. Now, I know there are questions also about Kyle's return from health and safety protocols. The earliest he would be able to return is what, by Sunday's game against Sacramento?
No, because of the new 6-day quarantine, they shortened it. He could actually get back by Friday night's game against the
Okay.
Rockets because his quarantine is now going to run through Thursday as opposed to going into the weekend. So, if nobody else enters protocols, which I would,
Who knows?
so according to reports, none of the Heat players tested positive. None of the Heat players who were also tested this morning tested positive. It was all the guys who got tested. It was all the last night after the Tuesday night game. Those were all the positive tests. So they already have gone through. The entire team has gone through another round of testing before heading out to San Antonio. And now, look, PJ Tucker and Zylan Cheatham are going to quarantine in San Antonio because they have to. It's unclear what the Heat are going to do. Do they stay in San Antonio? Do they go to Houston? But either way, I actually think it's easier to stay away from all this stuff on the road because, look, I know I mentioned that the Wizards were having their own outbreak. This is not because the Heat played the Wizards last night. That's just not how this virus works. It would take a little bit more time for the virus to settle in and then transmit and then to be tested positive. You're not going to test positive after playing the Wizards. After an hour playing them, you're not going to test positive. So this, I think, was a result of some of the holiday stuff that maybe the Heat were doing at home. And that's just natural stuff of being at home. I'm not accusing anybody of being responsible here. This is just what's happening across the entire league where you have almost 130 plus players now in health and safety protocols at this point. So, but now that they're on the road, I actually think it's probably easier for them to quarantine. So I would actually be surprised if we saw somebody else test positive. Maybe not surprised. I shouldn't be surprised by anything. But I would.
Right.
I think it's less likely than it was for somebody else to test positive. So now the Heat, if they could get Kyle Lowry back, if he just continues to test negative and clears protocols, and if they can get Jimmy Butler back from this ankle injury, then they should be able to play Friday against Houston in Houston.
To your point, an interesting aside here. Caleb Martin posting an Instagram story of an image outside of his hotel room of San Antonio with the thumbs down emoji. This city. So clearly, none of the Heat players that are healthy and able to actually go out and about plan on doing anything. Maybe because there are no good options in San Antonio.
San Antonio's not a good. Actually, I had not trying to relate my situation to being in quarantine and having COVID. But I had to spend New Year's in San Antonio my first year on the Warriors beat, and I can tell you it was not fun. And it looks like there's going to be a more than one Heat player having to do that, spending New Year's Eve perhaps in San Antonio. The Riverwalk's overrated. Sorry, San Antonians. The Riverwalk, like you're not luring me in with a cheap margarita. It's just not working.
I mean, that kind of helps. So, I mean, to be honest with you, that helps lube the process a little bit more.
It's better than no margarita, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Charles Barkley, Caleb Martin, and Wes Goldberg all on San Antonio's shit list at this point.
Yeah, maybe build your stadium a little bit closer to downtown instead of all the way out in the boonies. Anyway,
shots fired. There you go.
It's just not my favorite NBA city. So the Heat game against the Spurs postponed. Zylan Cheatham, PJ Tucker, they're going to have to quarantine in San Antonio after they got their results Wednesday morning. Gabe Vincent, who did get his result, didn't travel with the Heat, so he stays in Miami. And when he clears protocol, he could rejoin the Heat on this road trip. So under these new rules, Kyle Lowry's 6-day quarantine runs through Thursday, like we said, so he could be available by Friday. The other guys can't. Udonis Haslem, Max Strus, their quarantine runs through Monday. Zylan Cheatham, PJ Tucker, Gabe Vincent, their 6-day quarantine would run through Tuesday. So they could get Lowry back in time for Friday's game against Houston. They could get Haslem and Strus back, not by the game in Sacramento on Sunday, not by the game in San Francisco against the Warriors on Monday. The earliest that Strus and Haslem could come back is Wednesday's game in Portland. A week from now, David. A week from now would be the next Heat game that Haslem and Strus could take part in. And then Zylan Cheatham, if he's even on the roster, which let's put a pin on that for a second, PJ Tucker and Gabe Vincent, they wouldn't be available until that Wednesday game in Portland either. So that Wednesday game in Portland, that's the one you want to circle for the Heat potentially getting 4 or 5 guys back from protocols in that game and then being able to sort of field a roster that looks somewhat complete at least. And that's, again, just as long as nobody else tests positive and enters the protocol. But let's talk about Zylan Cheatham. His 10-day contract will expire by then. He signed it last Tuesday, so that puts his 10-day contract expiring at the end of this week. It's possible he never plays for the Miami Heat.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate because you want to see. Look, they've had their eye on a player like that. He has some NBA experience. They figured he might be able to slide right in. His work ethic, his versatility as a defensive player, his offensive game being somewhat limited, yet able to at least contribute and never get an opportunity to show what he has there, unfortunately. So, look, they may re-sign him. Who knows what will happen? That's the kind of decision-making process that every team is going through at this point. So I don't know. I know you did a video describing what Cheatham brings to the team and whether or not he might be able to contribute. I was curious to see whether or not he'd get the opportunity. I know a lot of Heat fans were. I'm not sure it's likely to happen this season. And look, we talked about in yesterday's episode following the win over the Wizards, what kind of player they would want to bring in. Surprisingly, they did not add a player from the Sioux Falls Skyforce, somebody like Micah Potter, somebody with NBA experience like Jahlil Okafor. We thought those were the kind of options that they might explore. Instead, they went and added Eric Holman, who happens to play. Yeah, he plays.
Well, they
for
also
the Spurs
added,
G-League.
and they also had Kyle Guy, who does have a little bit of NBA experience. Micah Potter got snatched up by the Detroit Pistons today.
I didn't see that.
Oh yeah, so he's not even an option. That's kind of the weird thing about all this is your list of guys who you would sign for 10 days, which I believe starts like in a normal year would have started January 5th, would have been the time where you could start signing 10-day contracts. Your list as a front office is, I don't know, 10 deep, maybe like max 10 deep.
Yeah.
Now you've got to be thinking like 50 guys. You've got to have a list of probably 50 guys. And what the interesting thing about the Alan Holman thing was, I don't know that it was a merit-based type of decision. It was just that he played for the Spurs G League affiliate in Austin and that he could realistically drive from Austin, Texas to San Antonio, Texas in time for the game tonight at 9:30, whatever time zone that is. So that was like the weird thing is like that your list is not just, okay, here's like 50 guys who we think might be able to contribute a couple minutes at the NBA level. Your list now has to include where are we playing and who can drive in time, who has a car and a driver's license. Like that's part of your list now. That to me, that this whole thing is just wild. The whole thing is just wild. Let's shift gears a little bit since now we know the Spurs game is not going to be played. Let's just shift gears to the next Heat game that is not postponed yet. Friday night's game in Houston.
As a quick point, I just want to say, look, there's so much going around, and I know that fans are entitled to think and feel however they like, but there's so much bemoaning of rosters being overturned and G League players being out there. I saw a lot of those tweets from Wizards fans and media, etc., the day before. Let's not go there. As Heat fans, like everybody's going through this. It's an unfortunate pandemic that's still impacting the NBA here, and rosters are going to get overturned. There's going to be a lot of players that are barely NBA players that are getting opportunities. And as such, these games are still going to count, whether they win or lose over the next 5-10 days, however long this kind of immediate impact is felt by the Heat roster. They're still going to have to go through it just like every other team in the NBA. So we can't say, oh, well, this loss doesn't count or this win doesn't count, et cetera, because you know what? All the other teams are going through this as well. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I mean, it's a good lead into my next question is, do the Heat have enough to win Friday night in Houston? And for that game to be played, we would imagine Kyle Lowry would be taking part in that game as well as Jimmy Butler. You would think with those two guys at the very least, and as of now, the Heat still have Duncan Robinson, Tyler Herro, but they're still very shorthanded. There's not a whole lot of depth happening for Miami. I think you're looking at maybe having 9 guys available because they still do plan to sign Kyle Guy and Alan Holman, despite the game getting postponed tonight. Is that enough to beat the Rockets?
Yes, assuming Garrison Matthews isn't out there, noted random scrub Heat killer Garrison Matthews. I think he's out due to injury. I'm not sure. I don't think it's health and safety protocols at this point, really. I'll admit it's difficult juggling all the names that have entered are on the list. So if Matthews is out there, who knows? But look, they have some size concerns too. Miami, Christian Wood is a guy who stretches the floor. Aspirin Holdroon, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that name.
Rookie?
He's talent. Sengun, sorry. Sengun, what's his last name? Alperen
Sengun. That's his last name.
Alperen Sengun. Okay, that's what it is. He's a versatile big too. I mean, he's a nice passer, etc. So, I mean, that's the challenge, I think, for Miami and whatever limited depth they have in the front court. So, I would say it doesn't matter. As Eric Spoelstra is fond of saying, they're going to set the template. They're going to lean into what they do well. If they have all-stars like Jimmy and Kyle, and I assume Kyle, who's been playing his best basketball for Miami before he entered health and safety protocols, he gets the additional rest that he needs at this point because of those extra minutes that he was logging on here. He should be coming out there as fired up as ever and ready to play at his best. I think he's going to be able to slide back into form almost immediately. So between him and Jimmy, I still like Miami's chances. And we've seen what this team is capable of. A point that I keep coming back to is that a team like Miami, with its stability, with its understanding of everybody, whether they're in and out of the lineup, whoever comes in understands their role, and there's an appreciation for what everybody else on the team can do. And I think that they'll be able to figure it out. Whoever's out on the floor, whether it's a guy from the G League or anything like that, they'll get a quick indoctrination into what Heat culture is, and they'll find a way to win, because that's just what this team does. The kind of stability this franchise has, this organization has, lends itself positively towards being able to weather this kind of particular storm, just as it did in the Orlando bubble.
Yeah. Look, things are changing by the minute here. This was just a quick reaction podcast to sort of break all down what happened and how we got to the point of the Heat having their first game of the season postponed. This is the 10th game this NBA season that was postponed overall. But that'll do it for today's Locked On Heat. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Comment, leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You could reach us on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. That's all for now. David, I guess we'll see where this all goes.
Let's hope we have a game to cover on Friday.